Good afternoon and welcome to the third webinar in the CDTC New Visions Learning Series. It's 3:30, so we are going to get started. I know we have more registrants signing on, but so that we can stick to the time, I would like to get started. So today's webinar will focus on the topic of infrastructure. We'll talk about what New Vision says about preserving infrastructure, what the condition of our network is and how we measure it, what data is available to you and how you can apply it to local planning and project development. This webinar is eligible for 1 CM credit if you are AICP. We have a few presentations lined up that will be about an hour long, followed by question and answer discussion, and we do have some poll questions. So please feel free to type any comments or questions you have into the chat box or the Q&A throughout the presentations. We will answer them at the end though. So just to briefly review what New Visions is, this is the Capital Region's long-range transportation plan, and it's basically a blueprint for a regional network that will guide a blueprint that will guide regional priorities and funding over the next 30 years. So most of you know or are familiar with the Capital District Transportation Committee, but quickly, we are a metropolitan planning organization based in Albany, and we cover the 4 counties, Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady, and we allocate federal transportation funding resources. And we include a number of transportation authorities and organizations in the region, as well as local governments. You can request virtual training or a tailored presentation for your local government, organization, or other group just by reaching out, and our contact information will be at the end, or you can go to our website, cdtcmpo.org, to find more information about that. Our next webinar in the virtual learning series is scheduled for December 15th at 3:30, and it will be about freight and e-commerce trends. So what's in the New Visions plan? There are a number of pieces, but the more technical and detailed information can be found in the 11 different chapters. If you're interested in more information, more detailed information on infrastructure, we do recommend that you visit the New Visions plan and review the infrastructure chapter there. The centerpiece of New Visions is our planning and investment principles. And these are how CDTC prioritizes funding decisions, and they're directly, funding decisions are directly tied to these principles. Preserving and managing the existing system is a high priority, as you can see here. So, though there has been quite a bit of development in the region, this has not been accompanied by significant population growth, which has resulted in more driving and an expanded network of more bridges and highways that we're reliant on. So the road and bridge network are estimated to have a replacement value exceeding $30 billion. And based on trends and existing conditions, the major policies and best practices recommended in New Visions are maintaining a state of good repair, managing congestion, not adding capacity, implementing complete streets, implementing transit-oriented development and smart growth, access management, safe systems or Vision Zero policies, complying with Americans with Disability Act, and expanding public participation. So our highest priority is maintaining a state of good repair. which means CDTC encourages funding to be prioritized for construction and reconstruction of pavements, bridges, sidewalks, and other existing infrastructure in order to maintain a reliable and structurally sufficient regional transportation system, which is important for all modes of transportation. How does New Visions move these priorities forward? So this is just a sample of projects and studies that are products of previous long-range plans. As you can see, we've built important linkages in the network and modernized the system for our changing needs, which we'll continue to do. Of course, transportation costs are increasing faster than available funding. So now we're going to take a look at existing infrastructure in the region and how we measure them. Here, Jacob Beeman from our CDTC staff will discuss this. Jacob, just let me know when you want the slide to move forward.
Okay, thanks, Jen. So before I get into kind of infrastructure conditions, I'd like to just go over a few facts for regional infrastructure so you all can get an idea of the size and scope of the infrastructure that we're dealing with and that we're talking about. So I'm going to refer to capital region infrastructure, which for the purpose of this presentation is going to refer to all of the infrastructure in Saratoga, Schenectady, Albany, and Rensselaer counties, so our 4-county planning area. And when I'm talking about infrastructure, I'm predominantly going to be talking about roads, bridges, and I think we get into sidewalks and trails and bike lanes as well. So overall, just kind of want to get an idea of the feel of how big or kind of the scope of the infrastructure in the region. 14,000 lane miles of roads, over 1,000 bridges, about 1,400 miles of bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and a total replacement value of over $20 billion. So next slide, Jen. So when we look at infrastructure conditions kind of internally in the office, we often break them down by different ownership, functional class, pavement types, and kind of a variety of different ways, whether they're on an interstate or NHS system. So we can kind of break down that larger 14,000 lane miles into smaller groups to kind of see how different groups are performing against each other. But for the sake of this presentation, we decided to just split it up into federal aid roads and non-federal aid roads. So federal aid eligible roads, obviously, they're eligible for federal aid funding through CDTC and the TIP. This roadway system is about 4,000 lane miles of that greater 14,000. So that's approximately 30% of regional lane miles, but it carries over 80% of regional daily vehicle miles traveled. So a small piece of the roadway system, however, it's carrying the majority of the traffic. So what you see here in this chart is kind of a breakdown of pavement conditions by surface score and surface conditions. So this is how we often kind of visualize pavement scores for a particular system. So in this case, the green line or the green strip at the top is pavement in excellent condition, which is surface score 9 and 10. The blue strip is pavements in good condition, surface score 7 and 8. The yellow strip is pavement conditions fair, surface score 6. And the red strip is pavements in poor condition, which is surface scores 5 and below, which I believe we'll get further into kind of the surface score rating a little bit when we get into our data collection efforts. So overall, with federal aid roads, we've been seeing an increase in good and excellent pavements over the past 10 or so years, and a decline in fair and poor pavements. So we're trending in the right direction. Currently, we have about 68% of federal aid roads in the Capital District are in good or excellent condition, which is great. Next slide, Jen. So the next slide, we're looking at our non-federal aid roads. So as you might expect, they are not eligible for federal aid funding. and essentially the remainder of the system compared to the federal aid roads. So this is made up of primarily local roads owned by local towns, cities, villages, about 10,000 lane miles, so 70% of regional lane miles, but only carries about 20% of the daily volume. So in this case, we have kind of seen a decrease in poor pavements, slight decrease over the past 16 or so years since we started our local pavement inventory. So slight improvements, but overall our non-federal aid roads are in the poorest condition out of all the roadway systems that we evaluate internally at CDTC. So right now, if you look to the end, we at that 2018 value, kind of that red band at the end, that's about 21% of local non-federal aid eligible pavements are in poor condition as of our last evaluation. So, you know, we don't see this as a massive concern, but just kind of want to show the fact and the difference between our federal aid eligible road system and the roads that are not eligible for that federal aid funding. Next slide, Jen. So we also want to touch on bridges a little bit in the region. As I mentioned before, there's just over 1,000 total bridges in the Capital District with various ownership, local, state. And of those bridges, that comes out to over 10 million square feet of deck area. So you'll see this chart here. When we measure kind of the conditions of bridges, we do that by whether a bridge is structurally deficient or not. Excuse me. And by just counting the number of structurally deficient bridges, we don't really factor in the size of that bridge. So to normalize it, instead of just counting the number of structurally deficient bridges, we use the amount of deck area. So right now we've got about 80 bridges considered structurally deficient. And when we bring in the deck area, that's about just under 10% of all deck area in the Capital District is considered to be on a structurally deficient bridge. So I guess to point out, overall, our bridges are performing, you know, we like to phrase it that they're not performing as well as pavement. So as you can see, since 2015, we have seen a slight increase in the structurally deficient deck area, and that's kind of been on a consistent basis. And really that 10% level is what we want to stay under as far as structurally deficient deck area. So we can say right now we're kind of trending in the wrong direction, but we are within state performance guidelines, and you know, really just want to keep an eye on these bridge conditions for you know, our next round of condition scores to see if that trend has changed. But as I mentioned, overall, you know, within state performance guidelines with bridges. Next slide, Jen. So what does this all mean, and kind of, you know, how do we stand on our infrastructure conditions at this point? So kind of as I mentioned before, overall, pavement conditions have maintained relative stability over the past 10 years, and even shown slight improvements in some areas. Bridges, as I mentioned, not performing up to the level as our pavements are, but still within our performance guidelines and within acceptable levels. Really, we've been doing this through you know, supporting a preservation first approach along with New York State DOT to fund transportation infrastructure, primarily through low-cost, short-term maintenance projects that are going to help us keep the system in a state of good repair. The one kind of question that we still have is what's going to happen in that 30-year horizon, you know, to our New Vision's 2050 planning horizon, because much of the infrastructure in the region was built mid-20th century, and a lot of it is going to be coming to the end of its useful life, where perhaps these low-cost maintenance preservation techniques might not have the impact as they have as these roads and bridges kind of come to the end of their life and may need more aggressive treatment, where it's full depth reconstruction of pavement or full on bridge replacement. So we know that these strategies could be changing in the future. And so what does that mean for transportation infrastructure, and what does that mean for us at CDTC? For us, I think it means that we need to continue our data collection efforts to really keep a finger on the pulse of what's happening with our infrastructure, and knowing the trends, and whether we're state of good repair is being maintained, or if we're slipping and kind of falling off a little bit. But it also means that we need to have continued coordination with New York State DOT on coming up with bridge and pavement forecasting techniques that are going to help us determine how we fund infrastructure projects in the future. We kind of know that the preservation first can't go on forever. So, really within the next 30 years or so, we're going to need to determine how to shift that strategy and incorporate some more reconstruction projects, how to fit that into our capital program, and really kind of find that balance with how we're being efficient with the transportation funds that we have in the region. So that's all I've got on infrastructure conditions, Jen.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. So now we're going to talk about CDTC infrastructures and our existing data inventories and ongoing data collection. And to present that, we have Teresa LaSalle from the CDTC staff.
Thank you, Jen. So we have the first slide here, CDTC's infrastructure inventories. There are two main categories of infrastructure data that we collect. One is the highway inventories and pavement ratings. Those are the same things. We just kind of use those terms interchangeably. And that speaks a lot to what Jacob just presented. And the second are bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure inventories, and we have several of these on the on-road bike routes, the bike lanes, sharrows, and cycle tracks, and other in the pavement bicycle infrastructure, trails, sidewalks, and crosswalks. And some of these are inventories that we've had for a long time, and others, we've just built recently, and all of these inventories are GIS based. Next slide. So the highway inventories or pavement ratings, we perform surface ratings on pavements using NISTOT's windshield survey method as part of our routine highway condition inventory. So some of the slides that Jacob went over with the graphs, those were those surface scores he was referring to. And those reflect elements of pavement stress, which are generally not structurally related, such as sealing and cracking, but are visually evident. And those ratings are made on a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 represents the poorest roadway condition and 10 the best condition. Next slide. So Jacob talked a little bit about non-state federal aid versus local. So we have 4 inventories, or really 5 that we do. The biggest one, as far as centerline miles, is our non-state federal aid, 700 centerline miles. We do that biannually, and those were last rated in 2019. And in Albany County and Albany City, we actually are under contract with both of those municipalities. We've been working with Albany County since 2001 and the City of Albany since 2006 to conduct surface ratings on roads owned and maintained by each entity. The Albany County inventory is 288 center line miles, and we do that one every year. And we're just finishing up our ratings for our 2020 on those. And then the City of Albany is 262 center line miles. That's done biannually, and we're due for that next year, 2021. And then we have our local sample and county routes. We do those every 4 years. The local sample is a random sample, with the local being here is being defined as non-federally eligible roadways. And then we also do the other 3 counties, Saratoga, Schenectady, and Rensselaer, every 4 years. and that is almost almost 900 centerline miles. So those take quite some time, and those were last done in 2018 and will be done again in 2022. Next slide. So here's just a couple examples on this slide of products that come from those inventories. The table on the left is for the non-state federal aid roadways, showing percentage of lane miles in each condition, color coded similar to Jacob's charts. And then the map on the right is from our City of Albany condition inventory. Again, this is showing surface score. It's not normalized by lane miles or anything. It's just surface score color coded. And as you can see, a lot of the roads end up kind of in that fair to good medium score range. Next slide. Okay, so now I'll talk about our bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure inventories. This is a little more extensive than the pavement stuff. So our most extensive inventory is our regional sidewalk inventory. There are over 1,200 miles of sidewalk infrastructure within our 4-county planning area. This project first began as a pilot project back in 2014. We had interns collect the presence and absence data for sidewalks and crosswalks within the city of Saratoga Springs. And from that effort, we quickly learned that undertaking a regional inventory of both sidewalks and crosswalks would be very time consuming and require a lot of intern and staff effort. So at that point, we decided to just proceed with the sidewalks. So between 2015 and 2017, CDT staff and interns collected data in the field and via aerial imagery for the presence and location of sidewalks within all 78 of our municipalities. And all of the municipalities that contain sidewalk infrastructure, which is all but 8 of our towns, received a data package with tabular data mapping, a written summary, as well as a GIS data file for those that had the technology to use that. And then just this past summer and fall, we used updated aerial imagery and took a look at all 78 municipalities again and updated the inventory to reflect sidewalks built and that were built since we finished or that had been captured in imagery, more recent imagery in the last few years. So the map on the right, red lines represent existing sidewalks, and the charts are showing regional sidewalk mileage distribution by municipality type and by county. No surprise, Albany County has the most with around 40% of the regional inventory, and the other 3 counties make up about 20% of the regional sidewalk inventory. And similar to municipality type, most of the sidewalks are within the cities, 20% in towns, and villages make up about 10%. Next slide. 2 of our other inventories that we've been doing a little longer are both our trails and on-road bike routes. So the trails, we've been collecting data on paved off-road multi-use trails, going back probably to about 2008 when we first purchased some technology to collect trail alignments in the field. And we also continue to use those in aerial imagery. And then we also get data from our planning partners and municipalities. So we try to keep that inventory as current and extensive as possible. Right now, there are over 130 miles of paved off-road multi-use trails in our planning area, and we've made a lot of progress with Empire State Trail going in, and there's several trails in the area that have either been built new this summer or expanded that we don't even have reflected in our database yet. So, that number will continue to grow. Then we have the on-road bike routes. So basically we collect data on the alignment and routing of official signed on-road bike routes, such as portions of the Mohawk Hudson or, the NISDOT bike routes and other local bike routes, such as Cohoes Heritage Trail that has both on and off-road portions. So we'll actually go out and see where the existing physical signs are that denote that route and map those out. And then the crosswalks, That inventory, you know, we started out in that pilot project with Saratoga. We realized that because there's just so many, and also the material type, so a lot of times it's paint and it fades, and it will be in a photo, and you go out in the field and it's not, there's no crosswalk, and then you look at something else and it's a different kind of crosswalk. So we decided that we have a partial inventory of those, and our plan is to kind of update that as time and needs allow, and do it more on like a corridor basis or a project level. Next slide. And then this is our newest inventory, our bicycle infrastructure inventory. So for here, we're defining bicycle infrastructure as on the pavement, physical bicycle treatment such as bike lanes, sharrows, and cycle tracks. Other facilities such as paved off-road trails, bike racks, on-road bike routes, or bicycle-related signs on posts such as share the road signs are either captured in a separate inventory, or we don't have inventoried at this time. So when we started back in 2018, there weren't that many treatments in the region, but you know, these are really growing. And first we just had a lot of sharrows in the city of Albany, but now we're seeing bike lanes and cycle tracks and all sorts of innovative treatments. So it's already grown. The chart on the slide will show you that just between 2019 and 2020, we've added about 25 miles of this infrastructure, and a lot of that is due to the Empire State Trail and a lot of on-road treatments there with bike lanes, buffered bike lanes, and some two-way cycle tracks. So the map on the right is kind of an inset, although this is a regional inventory, showing it at the regional level. You don't really see the detail, but this is an inset of existing bicycle infrastructure in Albany and Rensselaer counties. Next slide. So we have all this data. What do we do with it? Well, we use it at both the project and programming levels. You know, we create maps, spreadsheets, tables, charts, graphs, and infographics to view, analyze, and disseminate the information. We also perform data analysis and create data summaries. And with an increasing focus on data-driven decision-making and the challenge of limited funding, these data inventories help us to plan and program more efficiently. Next slide. So at the project and programming level, the project level, we use data for linkage projects, corridor, and regional studies. The map on the right is an example of a current linkage study, and we were able to provide you know, map and data for many different infrastructure inventories. Shown here are, you know, pavement ratings, crosswalks, sidewalks, trails, as well as bicycle infrastructure. At the programming level, CDTC uses infrastructure data to support, inform, and enhance TIP project selection through our TIP merit evaluation process, as well as in the development of new visions, our long-range plan, and in the development and evaluation of performance measures, as well as to assist our municipalities in the development of ADA transition plans. Next slide. So the pavement condition surveys help us to form a complete picture of the condition of all roads in the Capital District and are useful in tracking changes in the condition of the region's street and highway system over time. For capital programming, the data is used to red flag roadway sections that are candidates for resurfacing or reconstruction. Our members use the data to inform their annual paving programs and to select projects to submit for TIP funding. Our bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure inventories help us and our member agencies to gauge the existing network of bicycle and pedestrian facilities, identify gaps, and plan for future connections. Knowing where infrastructure currently exists helps us to maintain and improve existing infrastructure, as well as to expand the system to continue to make progress on implementing complete streets, promoting multimodal transportation options, and continuing to make the Capital District a quality region. In particular, our sidewalk inventory can be used as a starting point for ADA transition plans. So that's all I have. You know, I'll just put in a plug here. We're always looking to build our databases. So If there's any, we always encourage our municipalities to provide us with data. And if there's any questions or data requests, I'd be happy to respond to those as well. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Teresa. So Jacob's gonna do just a brief overview of additional ways that local governments use the data, and then we're going to have Tina Carton from the City of Saratoga Springs talk about how the city has been using CDTC data to move projects forward and pursue funding.
Thanks, Jen. So as Teresa mentioned, we do a number of pavement collection inventories for our own internal use, as well as working with member sponsors to collect data directly for them. And in one case, we collect data for the City of Albany on a biannual basis. And so really, we know that they're going to use this data to help inform their paving program, but really kind of just wanted to highlight kind of the steps that they use to go through that and come up with their candidate paving list. So maybe just to give some ideas of some of the members that are on the call, if you have your own data collection efforts, or if you're looking to get into one, kind of what you can do with that data once you have it collected. So as I mentioned, CDTC, we collect pavement conditions on city roads on a 2-year basis. Once the city has that data, they use it they develop an initial 3-year candidate paving list, which is generally made up of condition scores 6 and 5 and below. So really the fair and poor performing pavements. From there, it's more than just the condition score of the pavement. From there, they use kind of secondary inspections to refine that list. So city staff will go through and manually walk those blocks and those corridors that they're interested in potentially paving to further differentiate maybe between the 5s or between the 6s to see if they can see anything kind of at the street level that may or may not influence whether or not they'd like to pave that segment that year. And also within the city, they have quite a bit of coordination with local housing agencies and utilities. So in particular, they're coordinating with Habitat for Humanity and Albany Housing Authority, as well as National Grid, with really the idea of making sure that those agencies don't have any plans to go in and upgrade utilities over the next 5 or 6 years. So the city is really making sure that they're going to avoid paving a road and investing those resources in an area that's going to be torn up in the next 5 or 6 years. So they really want to coordinate and make sure that their roads are kind of falling into the fair and poor category at the same time that utility maintenance is due. So and another piece that's kind of maybe unique to the city of Albany, but is interesting, and I think kind of speaks to how else we can use this data, is within the city, they use the data to make sure that their pavement conditions are equitable and balanced throughout the city. So we work with them to create a series of maps that represent the pavement conditions in each of their 15 city wards. So the city's goal is to make sure that each ward has similar pavement conditions and that no ward is getting, kind of more of the pie than another. So really what obviously not every sponsor, not every municipality is going to be able to do this or potentially need to do this. But I think what it really kind of speaks to more so is the data is often, it's more than just numbers on a spreadsheet, especially when it's tied to GIS and we can look at it spatially. It kind of opens up another door for analysis and allows municipalities to kind of manage their pavement programs in a different way, rather than just kind of, putting a number to it or going out and making improvements on a cyclical basis. So really just wanted to touch on that and how the city of Albany uses that in kind of a unique way. Tina, that's all I have, Jen. So if you want to go on to Tina's.
Hi, this is Tina Carton. I'm with the City of Saratoga Springs, and I just wanted to talk. I think Teresa and Jacob have done a really great job of discussing the data that CDTC has been collecting. But I just wanted to kind of briefly go over how the city has utilized some of that data for the creation of different plans, and then from those planning documents, projects. Next slide. So our Complete Streets plan, when the consultant came up with the Complete Streets plan, as Teresa had described, CDTC has data on all of our sidewalks, and that data was then brought into our pedestrian network and facilities chapter. From that chapter, next slide, Jen. From that chapter, the city was able to work internally with different departments to come up with priority sections that are really located throughout the city, and areas that we were looking to make sure that we filled in any missing gaps, and we called it our Missing Sidewalk Links project. We were able to apply for funding utilizing that data and the data that was in our Complete Streets plan to submit a $1.9 million TIP funded project, which 80% of that is funded with DOT money, and the other 20% is from the city's capital budget. And we really tried to look at, where could which streets were going to be, had the highest traffic. We looked at accident data, which is another overlay. And also one of the important things that CDTC doesn't have, but the city had internally, is really understanding our street width. Because for this project, we were trying to have no right-of-way impacts, and to have no right-of-way impacts, it's really important to understand what the width of your streets are, because that will give you a good understanding of whether or not you're going to have the width to be able to put sidewalks in without going into private property. So this project is currently funded and we're in preliminary design. Hopefully we're going to be going out to public comment in about a month's time. Next slide. One of the data also is being utilized for the bike and pedestrian, as I said, pedestrian accommodations, but also bike accommodations. So this is also a two-way street. So as we start building out things within the city, CDTC has been collecting the data of where our trails are, where bike accommodations are on the street. But as we prioritize these and we actually implement them, you also need to make sure that we make CDTC aware of any of these changes so that they can update their databases as well. But our Complete Streets Advisory Committee has been using this data and coming up with a list of streets that they feel as the most important to prioritize and try to get those types of accommodations. Next slide. Then trail and network, this is building off the bikes. So this is also from our Complete Streets plan. And we're really trying to build out the trail networks and facilities throughout the city, prioritizing the high use areas. We're building out our Saratoga Greenbelt Trail, which is a 24-mile trail in and around the city and through the downtown core. Next slide. So when we're communicating this to stakeholders, to residents, businesses, and to the city council, what I've been doing is using a lot of the data that CDTC collected in the Capital District Trails Plan. If you're not familiar with the Trails Plan, it's a really wonderful document. It really shows some of the impacts that trails can make in a community, not just from an economic standpoint, but health standpoints as well. Next slide. And it kind of makes a broader picture. So you can see how these trails play into a larger network within the Capital District. So the trail plan incorporates the entire Capital District. It also looks at county by county. So this is just a shot from the trail plan of Saratoga County. Next slide. And then also in 2016, CDTC collected data and had people actually do trail counting. So we had 2 trail segments listed here, Railroad Run Trail and the Spring Run Trail. And this data has been really important to communicate to the City Council because it really shows the type of usage the trails are getting and the amount of usage our trails are getting. It also broke it down even further. I don't have it in this slide, but it breaks it down how many were pedestrians and how many were bicyclists. So we can really understand who those users are. And then, you know, as we expand our trail usage out, it kind of shows, it really shows where we should be concentrating our efforts. Next slide. So the data we did utilize, we used a CDTC grant and paired it with a grant from the AARP to make the Henry Street pilot. So one of our trail segments is going through the urban core. It's a very tight area. We don't have a lot of space on the street. It has existing sidewalks. Parking is always an issue in the downtown. So the compromise trail that was made, you know, there were 3 different designs that were created, and the Henry Street pilot turned Henry Street from a 2-way street into a 1-way street. It was a 2-week pilot that ran last year, and it had temporary materials, and we need to coordinate both with CDTC, CDTA, because there was a bus route, and all the city departments. Unfortunately, now with COVID, right when the final report from the consultant came out was really when COVID hit. So we didn't do a final presentation on the pilot to City Council, but this year we're finalizing the plans for our downtown connector trail, and that trail is going to be stopping at the end of Lake Avenue. And then I think in context, people will understand how the Henry Street pilot fit into that. Next slide. And I guess I just also want to say for these different grant submissions that we do, using the data and having somebody really put together all of the information, the technical expertise, the economic, the health benefits, all those different parts which CDTC includes in these types of planning documents have been really important for making the case for our city on why these projects make sense and why they should be funded. Another project we're working on right now with CDTC support is the ADA transition plan. So building off those sidewalk elements and the crosswalks that CDTC had been collecting, all of that data, we're now into phase 2 of our ADA transition plan. We just started collecting data on all of the sidewalks throughout the city. We're using 2 different apps that Chazen, who was hired by CDTC to assist us with this project, GIS Collector and GIS Survey 123. Using these 2 apps, we have a staff person from the engineering department, as well as Chazen out collecting that data and really doing a deep dive, showing us where those improvements need to be made. And then the next step after the data collection is going to be laying out a long-term roadmap on how the city is going to address the ADA issues that we have within the city and make sure that we have a plan, a future plan on how to support and make sure that we make the corrections. So if you have a next slide, I think if you had any questions, you know, please feel free to reach out to me. You know, you can reach me on the email address below. Right now, we're not working at City Hall, so you know, just you know, please email me and I will get back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Okay, so our next presentation is going to be from from Andrew Tracy from our staff, and he's going to talk about some new data collection initiatives. So Andrew, you should be able to share your screen now.
Yes, can you see it all right?
We can.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Tracy, transportation engineer here at CDTC. Here to discuss our signalized intersection inventory. So we have a lot of great data on bridges and pavement, but I also feel that traffic signals are a very important component of the transportation network as well. They facilitate almost all of the last mile travel that occurs in the region. Very important from a safety and operations perspective. So when we were compiling the New Visions update, traffic signal inventory was identified as a priority in 2 of the New Visions white papers, in the infrastructure and also the operations white paper. This inventory, much like all of the pavement and bridge data that we collect, having a signalized intersection inventory could also support a number of future planning efforts on signalized arterials, which I'll discuss in a minute. So I began working on collecting all of the signal data I could find back in the spring and compiling it into one GIS inventory for the region. The initial data sets I used were the ALICE data set, ALICE being the Accident Location Information System. And we also received a separate data set from NICE Region 1, which contains a lot of great data on the state-operated signals in the region. However, the ALICE data and the Region 1 data needed a bit of a manual spot check to be done, which I conducted. In many cases, the ALICE data in particular placed down many points on each intersection, especially if the intersection had, say, channelized right turns or features like that, which made it very difficult to count the number of signals that we had. There were signals missing, which I added in, and there were also a lot of false positive signals. For example, in places where a signal had been upgraded to a roundabout, but the signal remained in the inventory, so I removed those. And in addition, there were a lot of places where the ALICE data used what was called a master int value to identify the intersection where the signal was, and I had to go through and correct some of those by hand as well. But I won't go into too much detail about that. I just want to show you the results. The pictured here, all of the signalized intersections in the 4-county CDTC planning area, and I have some zoomed in maps of the inventory as well. Here's one for Saratoga Springs, showing some of the signalized roadways going in and out of the city. Another map for Schenectady County, and you can clearly see some of the main signalized arterials, such as Central Avenue, showing up on maps like this. Albany and Colony have the majority of the region's signals, and I'll show you some statistics in just a minute, but Albany has a dense grid of traffic signals. And additionally, so does Troy, pictured here. So in total, we estimate there are 1,148 signalized intersections in the CDTC planning area, plus or minus a few, with roughly half of those being in Albany County. Albany is the city with the most traffic signals, with 313, almost all of which are maintained by City of Albany. Schenectady has 137 and Troy has 120 signals. In total, 708 of the region's signals are in the cities listed here, and 440 of them are outside of the cities. Some more fun facts about the region's traffic signal infrastructure. As I mentioned, about half the signals are in Albany County. The town with the most signals is town of Colony with 125, But outside of the cities, most signals are operated by DOT, and most of Colony's, Central Ave, Wolf Road, for example, are DOT operated signals. Locals, including the cities, operate 58% of our region's traffic signal infrastructure, and Region 1 DOT operates the remaining 42%. On the next slide, I'll show you some signalized corridor statistics, but the corridor with the most signals is Route 5 Central Ave from Schenectady to Albany, which has 92 signals on it all in a row. In fact, if you look at just the top 11 signalized roadways in the region, those 11 roadways on their own contain the majority of the region's signals. I also found that there are 7 municipalities in the region that have just one traffic signal as well. And here are the region's top signalized corridors. As I mentioned, in first place, the Route 5 corridor, State Street in Schenectady, Central Ave, all the way through Albany with 92 signals. Route 9 is next with 84. New York State Route 32 has 66, and so on. But these handful of 11 signalized corridors, as I mentioned, they contain slightly over half of the region's signals. So now that we have a basic signalized intersection inventory, what do we do with it? There are a few planning initiatives that I'd like to get the ball rolling on. The first is a study that we had in our work program for this year called the Regional Signal Timing Program. And what we had intended to do was issue a solicitation to all of our signal operators in the region and ask for signals that are in need of retiming, maybe signals that haven't had their timings optimized since they were installed, or signals in places where there may have been a shift in travel demand due to recent development. And then we were going to hire a consultant to go out, develop optimized timing plans and implement them out in the field. But then COVID happened, and this has been on hold ever since. Traffic patterns are very different today, and we don't want to retime the region's signals to the COVID pattern necessarily, as traffic is continuing to shift and fluctuate. But we also hope to use the signalized intersection inventory for future planning for our region's signalized arterials. Hopefully we can get some TIP projects in the pipeline to upgrade a lot of the signal equipment on these corridors and install smarter traffic signal control systems, such as demand responsive or adaptive traffic signal control systems where they're needed. And we would also like to integrate more data into the inventory wherever we can. Ideally, at the moment, most of the signals in the inventory have very little data, just the data that they carried over from the ALICE system. And then for the state-operated signals, we have more data. But what I would like to see is if we could go out and somehow collect things like the type and age of the controller equipment, what types of bike ped accommodations might be present at the intersections, and which corridors have some type of signal coordination system in place. And if we could collect data like this, then the inventory could become the basis for performance management of the region's signals. Jacob and Teresa spoke a lot about the region's pavement and bridges, and we can actually report out on the condition of the pavement and bridges and how that condition changes over time, and how we can use our federal funding to improve the state of the pavement and bridges over time. We'd like to do something similar, if possible, for the region's traffic signal infrastructure as well. That was my final slide regarding the signalized intersection inventory, so I'll turn things back over to Jen.
Thanks, Andrew. If you can make me the host again.
Yes. How's that?
Great, thank you. I think.
Okay, there you go.
Great. Okay. So if you have any questions or comments and want to send them in the chat or the Q&A, please do that now. In the meantime, we are going to do just a short poll if you'd like to participate. You can do it by opening up another browser and going to pollev.com and entering CDTC NV 2050. Or you can use your cell phone and text. For the number, you're going to text 22333, and in the text, CDTC NV 2050. And I don't know why the slide isn't going forward. Hold on. Okay. So has the COVID pandemic impacted any ongoing infrastructure projects? If you've activated the poll, you just have to text A, B, C, or D. Okay. And if yes, what kind of project was it? Was it a federal aid, a local project, or both federal aid and local? And one more poll question, is the COVID pandemic expected to impact local revenue for future infrastructure projects? Yes or no? Okay. So just to wrap up, existing and upcoming funding opportunities, CDTC currently has some open opportunities that they are accepting applications on a rolling basis for. That includes ADA transition plans, the CDTC CDRPC Technical Assistance Program, and we do anticipate doing a new TIP beginning next year, so the 2021-26 TIP. You know, the big question mark everyone has been talking about is stimulus. If so, will it be early next year or when? We don't know, but it is something that we have been thinking about and trying to prepare for. If you are looking for resources on additional data or where you can find the data that we covered in today's webinar, you can visit the CDTC website. If you go to the /maps, you'll find our maps and data page. Also, the Cornell Local Road Program has, I believe it's called a highway school and some other training programs, and all of that information can be found on their website. The DOT Pavement Management Unit also has information on pavement conditions. And then, of course, DOT's data and mapping applications can also be found on the DOT website at the link below. So now we will see if there are any questions and answer them. You can find more information, including the full New Visions plan at cdtcmpo.org. As always, you can connect with us on social media or contact us by email, text, or voicemail, or of course, you can try to send us mail. And it looks like we do have okay, so Andrew actually has some information on our local bridge preservation study. So I'm gonna quickly just make him the host and let him share a couple of those slides because those might be of interest to people. Okay, Andrew, I think you should be able to share your slides now.
Okay. All right. Yep. Thank you very much. I guess I should have just rolled directly into these, but three more slides regarding one of our new work program tasks. This is a new technical study that we just kicked off just a couple of weeks ago. The long name for the study is Identification of Bridge Preservation Candidates, Treatments, and Costs for Locally Owned Bridges, a 2020 update. In brief, we've been referring to it as the Local Bridge Preservation Study. And this study that we just kicked off on November 2nd, this is an update to a prior study from 2015 with largely the same scope. So the purpose of this study is to examine all of the 371 locally owned bridges in our 4-county region and to help the bridge owners come up with the appropriate bridge preservation treatments for each bridge to help set up the bridges for future funding, either through our TIP or through Bridge New York or any other funding source. So the project is led by a project steering committee that we convened with local bridge engineers from all 4 counties, several cities, and Region 1 staff as well. So the scope of work in brief, we hired a consulting firm, CDM Smith, to review the existing structural conditions on each bridge. They reviewed the inspection reports that are prepared on a 2-year basis by DOT for all of these bridges. They use this data to develop structural evaluations and treatment recommendations for each bridge that is below an identified condition threshold. They also go through the report data and identify individual bridge members that may be at risk of failure and need spot repairs. All of this data is compiled into a spreadsheet with recommendations summarized, and these spreadsheets are distributed back to the local bridge owners just as a summary. And a subset of the bridges will also receive supplementary field visits to field verify the structural evaluation and recommendations that were prepared. And all of this also gets rolled into a final report. So the deliverables for the study, as I mentioned, a summary spreadsheet showing each bridge, its condition, and for bridges that are below the condition threshold, it also summarizes the recommended bridge repair strategies as well. And in the smaller subset of bridges that we're taking a closer look at, a fact sheet or a technical memo will be prepared for each bridge with more detailed recommendations and conditions data. Final reports will also be provided to all of our local bridge stakeholders. The current schedule, we just kicked this off on November 2nd, and we expect the project to be complete in April of next year. So this is my final slide. If anybody has any questions relating to this study, please feel free to reach out to me. If you'd like to be involved, please feel free to reach out as well. So thank you very much, and I'll return things to Jen.
Thanks, Andrew. All right. It does not look like we have any questions in the chat or in the Q&A.
Oh, sorry. I had questions for
Sure.
Andrew. If Andrew wanted to pop back on, or we might have lost him.
Nope, I'm here.
I realized I sent my chat to Teresa and not to all. So with the bridge, I saw one of the bridges, I believe is the Church Street Bridge, which is a New York State DOT bridge in the city of Saratoga Springs. It looked like from your map there that it was a very poor rated. It looked like it was green, which was like the worst rating you could get. Because
I think, on the map, the green was
Best?
good and red is bad, yes.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's what, yeah, because it looked like it was a number 6, so I just thought 6 was the worst. Okay. So if these bridges, though, are, say, either county or state owned,
Mhm.
will the cities be getting the bridge reports as a stakeholder in the process? And secondly, were you looking at the need for complete streets improvements, or were you just looking at the physical, what's currently there, and not maybe what's necessary or what's needed? Because we have a neighborhood on the other side of the railroad tracks, and we have county road and a state road, or 2 state roads that cross it, 2 DOT roads that cross over them, 2 DOT bridges, and they both don't have pedestrian accommodations currently on them. And with the growing population on the other side, there's a real need for it. Would that recommendation be in there?
So I'll answer the second question first. The study is looking at the bridge inspection data only and sort of doing a structural evaluation only. So we didn't ask the consultant to speak to the need for complete streets improvements on the bridge. It's purely a structural evaluation. So the repair strategies will be brought to the bridge owners, and then if the bridge owners feel that there's room on the bridge for complete streets improvements, like you mentioned, then it's sort of on them to bring those forward for funding. Regarding the first question, so there's actually a handful of bridges where the jurisdiction is a little unclear. We are going back and forth with the consultant to finalize the list of bridges that will be included in the study. The 371 that I showed you on the map is based on data that DOT provided to us last year, but as I mentioned, sometimes it's a little unclear with regards to who the bridge owner is versus who's responsible for the bridge maintenance. And there's cases throughout the region where the bridge may carry a local roadway, but is still maintained by the state for one reason or another. So we are working with our consultant and working with our local engineers to clarify the maintenance jurisdiction on a few dozen of these bridges.
If we had a bridge that you may not be looking at, can we have it added? Is there?
Yes, if we missed one, please let us know. Like I said, we pulled this data from DOT, and the consultant has access to the state's bridge data information system. If you'd like, I can send you the list that we're using, and
that would be
you
great.
can let me know if you feel that we're missing one in Saratoga Springs, and we can investigate.
Because there's a bridge that I've talked to our DPW about, and actually nobody does know the jurisdiction.
Okay. I can send you the map or even a list in spreadsheet form, and then we can correspond about it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, if there are no other questions, we can wrap it up for today. So again, the next webinar is scheduled for December 17th, and it will be focused on freight and e-commerce and how trends in e-commerce can impact our communities and the transportation system. So thank you to all of our presenters today and attendees, and I hope you have a great night.